Hello, hello. It is time for seasonal anime reviews. This video, like most of these review videos, is pretty late. I wish I could say, oh, it was just because I was so busy. I was like kind of busy. I'm always kind of busy, at least, but I did have like a decent amount of free time, which would have been ideal for, watching anime and writing slides about it and thinking about anime and stuff. But instead, it's taken up by a vice even more irredeemable. Video games. Video games. I played so much F-Zero 99, and then just when I was getting tired of that, the Suika game phase fad swept the nation, and now I'm rocking that. You can see I got up to a 28k high score. No, not 28k, Jesus Christ. 2.8k high score, which I thought was not bad. I want to get 3k really badly. It's so addictive. And F-Zero 99, I got up to S3, which is decent, but not great. I definitely could have grinded that game even further. But yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm a gamer, but I'm also an anime fan. All right, so let's talk about what I watched last season. We'll start with the obligatory things that I didn't watch. The girl I like forgets her glasses. I love this manga. It's just a very nice, charming rom-com that is pretty light on premise, but has a lot of really sweet moments. And then the anime was made by... I can't remember what the studio is called, but they made like Handshakers and stuff. They just have that really weird style of CG anime that I've heard now that some people actually really like, and that kind of makes me wish I could appreciate it, but I don't. Overall, I just don't enjoy how it looks, which is a shame. And so this was kind of a non-starter for me because it just makes me a little nauseous to look at. It's like strange to me that the series that I think has a decent amount of buzz and definitely has like a loyal readership was adapted by such a controversial studio, let's say. I also kind of wanted to watch Helk. I had heard good things about the manga, and then I heard good things about the anime when it was running. I'm still quite curious about it. I'll probably read the manga at some point, but yeah, just didn't get to it. And that's actually it. Usually this is quite a long list. I wish I could say, oh, it's because I watched so many shows this season and I just covered like everything that was even remotely interesting to me. But it was more just this season did not have a whole ton of stuff that I was that interested in. There's also a few series that I started watching that I'm going to talk about next season because in this case it was a 2-core. JJK Season 2 is still ongoing. We're into the Shibuya Halloween arc. I've been really impressed with it so far, especially during the Gojo flashback arc. Some of the direction and sequencing and stuff was just so creative and aimed for these kind of like weird transcendental spaces, like so far outside of just depicting reality. Really cool stuff. You can tell Mappa realized they had a major hit on their hands, and instead of being like, oh, okay, that means people will watch it no matter what, let's phone it in, as so many shonen adaptations in the distant past have looked, really embracing this kind of modern shonen trend of this is a series that can become giga huge. We need to do a great job with this. We need to make this like creative and exciting and dynamic, even for people that have been watching a lot of anime. Let's do something new, and they're killing it. This I was watching as well with our anime club. I think like everything. Actually, I only watched anime with Anime Club this season. Both of these I was watching with Anime Club. I was really enjoying this. The production quality is great. It has a lot of really nice cathartic moments. Sometimes it got a little tedious, but whatever. And then abruptly after episode 9, there were like indefinite hiatus, which is not a good sign. And I was tempted to just review those 9 episodes in this video, but I'll hold out for a bit and hopefully, they'll make more because I was really enjoying it. I'll probably read the manga if that seems unlikely and maybe talk about it at length when and if it seems like it's time to give up hope. But yeah, hopefully we can get the rest of this at some point. Okay, let's get to the shows that I did watch, starting with... Oh, this isn't animated. Don't read it yet. Don't read it yet. Okay. Starting with My Happy Marriage. Okay, so this is my first real foray into a pretty popular genre of manga and anime, and especially light novels that I had never really touched before, which I would call the magical dream suffering girl period piece genre. And it's something that I'd been aware of for a long time. I know people that are like really into this stuff and read dozens and dozens of these series. I know that it's a very popular genre in Chinese manga and manhwa, and also there's a lot of very popular Japanese series, such as this one. But it just never really interested me. There was nothing that I thought kind of hooked me in terms of, oh, this sounds like a fun time. And basically exactly what I expected. Like, based on just reading synopsises of these series, I kind of had an idea in mind of how this genre plays out, and it played out exactly like that. I.e., in a world of noble families, arranged marriages, and other stately nonsense, and also a world of magical spell-casting powers and ancient demons, a poor girl with no family status or powers is treated cruelly as a servant for a noble family, ultimately sent off to be married with someone regarded as a cold and mean man. Surprise, though, the man is actually quite wonderful. He's just a little aloof and is troubled and has a lot of, emotional baggage and such. And surprise, she actually does have powers, and they're the most wonderful powers of all. And from this point on, her life gets very interesting as her and her man take on all sorts of challenges and stuff and realize her true potential. There's some stuff that I appreciated about this one. There's some stuff that I enjoyed in the watching experience. It was really, really pretty, and I think that was the main reason we picked this up in DDR Club. It's a Madhouse adaptation. It's just a joy to look at. Almost every scene has really amazing backgrounds or character designs or character animation. The action scenes were all really cool. All of the effects of the spell casting and stuff. It wasn't the weirdest thing. It wasn't all that creative or unique. Nothing really too flashy. Like, even these action scenes are done really, really well, but it's just kind of your standard fire blast, lightning blast, wind blast, whatever. But it was just so enchantingly pretty that it always was a treat to just look at. There are some nice moments of emotional catharsis. A lot of long sequences of suffering where you want to see the suffering end, and then it does. Just kind of characters becoming happy is always nice, even if I wasn't like super... Well, we'll get to this, but... yeah, I don't know. It's just... what more do you want than like a nice emotional catharsis? Some nice sentiments too. The messaging overall, I think... is mixed, but there's definitely good aspects. You see the characters become more whole people. They become more emotionally in touch with themselves. Nobody kind of starts at a position of being just a perfect little guy or girl that's just totally unilaterally wonderful. But instead they just kind of have all of this potential to be so great to each other, and then they kind of grow into that potential. And that's very satisfying to watch as like an arc. And that's about it. Okay, let's get into stuff that I didn't like. Probably the biggest one is that I just found the main character like annoying. Like, I just was not really excited to be around her and watch her do stuff. This sounds pretty inhumane to say. I don't really like the criticism of like, oh, I just didn't like them. Because in general, I like people. In real life, I like people. Most characters I like. I just, enjoy the feeling of liking people. But I just never grew fond of this character. I think part of it is just her relationship with the world is so like black and white that every character basically either like insta-hates her, and schemes to see her suffer and just has no regard for her at all as a human being, just kind of treating her as a pawn or an obstacle, and just, treating her like shit, which is just like frustrating. or to compensate, they just insta love her. Like instantly they're like, I want to protect you. I am devoted to you. You're perfect the way you are. I'm going to make good for all those years of suffering. And it's like these two things don't really balance each other out. It's just like kind of two extremes that are just like both disinteresting and kind of like are frustrating for the same reason. And none of it is based on her personality. None of it is really based on anything she actually does. Only kind of the vague sense of who she is in terms of family and having these like powers or being betrothed to this guy. She gets like status that make people either love her or hate her, and that's just kind of where it ends. Her personality, I would say, ranges in this kind of long character arc between I want to be a good wife, but I'm like afraid, to I want to be a good wife, but I'm no longer afraid. And it is like a nice kind of arc, I guess, but it's still just so limited and so disinterested in who she is as an actual person and cares only about her relationship to others and what she can do for others. And it's just, I don't know, it's just not satisfying to me. Plus, this is maybe the worst part, she just sounds like she's gonna cry every time she talks. She's always making noises like that. When she's happy, it sounds like she's about to cry from happiness, that this is just like the best moment of her life and she can't even handle it. When she's sad, she's just like gonna cry, and when she's defiant, she's like, I'm gonna cry, and it's like, I don't even think she ever actually cries, but it's just this tone that I started finding like really grating. And again, this sounds really mean and inhumane to say, but I can't help it. It was unpleasant. In general, a lot of the really dramatic scenes, typically scenes where like she's suffering or sometimes he's suffering and then one of them has to kind of like come to the aid of the other. I just found like really frustrating. The way they were paced was so belabored. These big emotional breakthroughs were just so melodramatic that she's like riding this edge of like accepting something or coming to terms and being able to do something or gathering the courage to say something for so long that it just starts to feel like excruciating. And it's like you start to care less about, oh, she's gonna have this like emotional breakthrough, good for her, and more about like, just get this over with, like just on to the next thing, please. The worst was the action scenes that are just drawn out beyond suspense to absolute tedium. I think the point at which the series became, like, I don't want to say, like, irredeemable, but I kind of lost a lot of hope for it. And I just had to acknowledge, oh, I'm just, like, not having a good time with this one. There's a scene where her former family that was treating her like shit kidnaps her out of mad jealousy. They can't believe she's getting married to such a wonderful man. Should have been them. And they're just like torturing her in the shed, and then her dude obviously shows up to save her, but is just like walking so slowly through this family's estate. And I know that, you know, this is based on a manga, and it's hard to adapt a manga that if you have like 8 panels intercut of somebody walking, and you have to cut back to that every time if you're matching the pacing of the manga, then it ends up being not that good pacing for anime. Because it's these very tedious shots back to him, like, walking slowly, so fucking slowly over to the shed. And it's like, okay, yeah, like, it's hard to convey that sort of suspense. It's hard, but it's not impossible, and I just don't think they did it very well, that it just became so tedious and so frustrating, and not the kind of good frustration where you're like, oh, I'm going to be so satisfied when he finally shows up and saves her and, you know, gets revenge for all this brutal beating she's enduring. But it's just kind of like, why can't you just lightly jog at least? Like, why is there no urgency whatsoever in this scene? Like, I complain a lot, but I know it could be a lot worse. Like, I know most anime is even worse for these sorts of things because of like adapted manga pacing and really having a hard time figuring out how to stretch out scenes to kind of match page count and stuff like that. I know that it could get a lot worse than this, But I just have so low tolerance because I just watch so few shows that kind of operate in this mode that I was just not having a good time. In the end, though, the biggest flaw is that I just never really cared about the setting or the premise, the general conceit of it. It just didn't interest me because everything just kind of seemed pretty shallow. Like the politics, the magical powers stuff, the history of all these different families and their inherited superpowers. It just seemed very superficial, very simplistic, and mostly inconsequential. That it's just kind of set dressing to get to like the emotional situation of the show, like just to get to this relationship and then just watching the dynamics of how that relationship plays out. And very counter-revolutionary. And this is what I complained about with Oshinoko too, and this is what I'll complain about in everything that isn't like One Piece Dungeon Meshi. It's like an unambition thing. It's like a series that is afraid to have like real true ambitions of great revolutionary storytelling potential. And maybe this series does eventually, but it's not covered in the anime. There's no systemic change that's even considered. It's not even remotely on the table because the good guys are nobles and the bad guys are also nobles. And the problem isn't that there's an entire system of nobles that have these indebted servants, or that there's this weird caste system around magical powers, or this weird military worship fetishism because of the threat of these immortal ancient demons that may come back. None of that is like inherently problematic. It's just that the wrong people are too influential and that the good nobles should succeed more. And that to me is like very, very frustrating. And again, it's like, okay, yeah, it's like counter-revolutionary and it's like not good political messaging in my mind. Like I disagree with the politics. But moreover, I just think it's unambitious story writing. Like to introduce this sort of system that is so obviously flawed, but to say, oh, that's kind of like outside of the scope of our story. We're not going to like really comment on that or address that, let alone have a plot about trying to change that. Instead, you know, that's just kind of this unfortunate window dressing. Or maybe it's like fortunate. Like that's where it becomes a political question, but whatever. I'm belaboring this a lot. I'm just saying that it's like a disappointing thing to not tackle these issues. Yeah, so I don't know. A lot of complaints. We're starting this video off kind of negative. But it really just confirmed that I don't think this genre is for me. Because this is in the end just trappings of the genre. Like you build up this unfair society and then you have your protagonist who excels in that society despite that. And that's like the fantasy. And I think I can understand why that's a relatable fantasy because that's the world that we live in too. That, you know, you can, our society is pretty shit and then you can be born into a very low rung of that society and then through aspiration and ambition and your own natural talent, you rise up to a point of excellence within that society, but society doesn't change. You just kind of change your position in society. And so I think I can understand why, even though the setting is kind of fantastical and, you know, historic and removed and has all these powers, it's still that type of ambition in a lot of these stories. But that's not for me. I don't want my stories to be like that. Yeah, so, God, like, it's so pretty, though. And this is just it. Like, how do I score this? Because it's not bad, per se. Like, I think a lot of stuff could have been executed better. But it's more just that this genre really isn't for me. But then I also decided, you know, the way I should score things is for me. And for people that are similar to me and have similar tastes to me. But at the same time, it's like, I can't really see myself giving this too low a score. And this is something my boyfriend complained about when he watched the Oshinoko review. That he was like, you complained about this for like a solid 30 minutes and called it like an abject moral failing. And then you gave it like a 6. and it's like, okay, true. But I have to leave room for the really bad anime. Like, there's so many shows that I don't even talk about each season that I don't even know who's watching, but it's certainly not me. Stuff that I wouldn't even think to watch, like stupid Isekai Harem 87 or whatever. That's like a 2, right? Like, there has to be room on the scale for shows like that. So I don't know. It's in the end, it's just like rating systems aren't that great. I'm gonna give this a 7 though, because I didn't really like it, but I can acknowledge that it's leagues better than a lot of anime that comes out every season. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about Noble Farmer. Yay, another show about the aristocracy. No, just kidding. This is from the creator of Full Metal Alchemist, and even more relevantly, Silver Spoon, one of the most acclaimed and beloved mangaka of Japan. This is an autobiographical short about her upbringing on a farm. Did you know that? She was born and raised on a farm? This is a really fun watch with the DDR Club, our anime watching club, because I grew up on a farm. I was also born and raised on a farm. So I can be like, hey, I know about that. I did that. Even more often, though, I would just be like, oh, God, wow. I didn't have to do that. Like, I always say, oh, I was born and raised on a farm, which is true. But our farm was less hardcore than most farms. Like, we didn't have animals, right? Like, we didn't have dairy cows or beef cows or chickens even. We just did crops, which vastly reduces the workflow. And we had what we call a hobby farm, where my dad still worked, and my grandparents were retired, but, you know, before that they worked. It wasn't just income from the farming, and a lot of the farming work was contracted out. So we just... The way I'm saying this sounds like we're basically farm landlords, which doesn't feel great. But yeah, so we did a lot of farm work, but not all of the farm work. The most substantial parts of it, like actually planting and harvesting crops, were contracted out. So a lot of this stuff I didn't have to do, and thank God for that. And then the best times... Because even stuff I didn't have to do, I know about. Like, a lot of my friends growing up were kids that lived on farms, and I saw all sorts of other farms, and I worked on other farms as, like, part-time jobs when I was a little kid. Not when I was a little kid, that sounds dangerous, but, you know, in my teen years. So there's a lot of times where I was just like, I have never heard of anyone doing something like this. I guess this is just, like, Japan time. This is how they have to deal with things in Japan. I love these sorts of shorts. They're so frantic. They try to cram so much, like, information. Everyone is talking so quickly. It's, like, set up kind of like a variety show where the mangaka is being interviewed by this kind of unnamed reporter-type person. It's unclear who she is. But they just have this, like, frantic conversation where the mangaka is constantly regaling with different memories and stuff. And then they're constantly cutting to almost kind of like skits displaying these farming memories. The way the stories just unfold back and forth this way. I love the way the mangaka MC is treated, that she's both, like, very haggard by these memories. Like, there's, like, a weariness that has persisted into her adult life that still really strongly comes through. But she's also just, like, so manic, just kind of remembering these cascading memories and all the different stories that each one triggers. It's just, like, a really fun emotional energy. There's, like, a special way that people talk about their childhoods that I think only happens when people talk about their childhoods. And this show is a really great example of it, where it's like you kind of downplay some really obviously insane moments. You can really casually, and it's not like an act. It's not, maybe there's some deliberateness to it, but it's just how you genuinely feel about these incidents in their childhood. It's how I feel about my childhood too, that I can very casually talk about stuff that, like, is insane, that, like, shouldn't have happened. But then what persists more strongly in emotion is, like, pettiness. Like, things that bugged you as a kid, chores you didn't like to do, that weren't, like, dangerous or bizarre, but just annoying, that you still feel so genuinely upset and petty about them. And then there's also just moments of sincere nostalgia. Like, I won't ever say, oh, I loved growing up on the farm. I much rather would have grown up in the city. But there were some really unique things that happened during my childhood that were part of my childhood life that I look back on pretty fondly. And I think, wow, like, first, I made it out of there, which is a great feeling. But there were some beautiful moments out there in the country. It's just a weird, funny kind of emotional state that's sometimes even very genuinely moving when somebody, especially somebody that had an atypical childhood, or especially like an atypical childhood, compared to their peers, compared to the people that they're talking to, when they get going about the way they were brought up. And, like, I know even more extreme examples in my life, like people that grew up in the south of the United States and went to very religious churches, or people that grew up in like, Russia, in, like, very low-income areas. And, yeah, it's like, I don't know. It's something very fascinating and moving to hear my friends that have had strange and often difficult childhoods talk about them. It's really great, I think, that one of the best mangaka of the current era is also just so charming. You think of mangaka as these, like, almost like artisans in a lot of ways. They don't really need to have, like, a public face. Often they literally don't have a public face. She doesn't really have a public face either. She's always appearing as this cow avatar. But to know that she's still actually this charming and this witty and can have such a fun time VAing this little cartoon is a blast. I think that's so lucky. Oops, I forgot to animate this, but this I'll give an 8.5 too. I really enjoyed it. It actually was quite moving to me at times, and it made me reflect a lot about my own childhood. But it's like not super substantial either. It's like a 5-minute short and just kind of has really goofy animations, so it felt weird ranking it much higher than this, but I really did enjoy it. Okay, moving on to the final show we'll talk about today, and we're going to talk about this at some length. Heavenly Delusion. So this was a show that actually aired the season before this, but we didn't watch it at that time. I guess we just had other shows that we prioritized higher. And then when we were trying to figure out what to watch in this season, which was kind of more slim pickings, a friend of mine that had watched, I think, all of this or some of this, like really, really started pushing for it. And then because I really trust said friend's tastes, I started pushing for it too. I watched a couple of episodes and I was like, yeah, this is the real deal. This show is amazing. It was such a banger. It lived up to all of that hype and then some. It pulls off two extremely distinct settings, both extremely, extremely well. Settings that aren't just very different, like, aesthetically and in terms of, like, the characters there. But we'll get into this more later, but just kind of, like, the logic of those settings, I think, was so masterfully handled. One is the school setting, where it's this very eerie vibe of not really understanding, like, what the rules are, what these kids can and can't do. Everything is very artificial. Everything is isolated. They have no knowledge of the outside world whatsoever. And it has, like, a really unsettling vibe that was pulled off great. And then the other was the very wild, clearly there are no rules here, borderless zone society. And we'll talk a lot about zones later in this review. Neither of these are entirely unique. I've seen both of these settings done probably dozens of times. But they're pulled off with such intrigue. Like, even if you're like, oh, it's this kind of place, you really genuinely want to know, like, what is unique about this place? What are the rules here? How is this developed? And so many innovations, too, that even within these kind of well-trodden spaces, they do a lot of things that are totally unique, that are so inventive. And such an eager hunter for ideas. Everything is just so full of ideas and internal lore and concepts and characters. Everything is just stuffed to the brim with these moments, this such richness and just the variety of the things happening. They're never really content to just be like, well, this is like now an action sequence. Well, this is like a sad backstory. Like, everything is so richly interconnected. Both of these distinct settings overlap in the zone of mystery, and this is the first thing I really want to talk about. Is the series pulls off one of the best feelings of mystery I've ever gotten in anime, just at all, or like in any medium. I can't remember the last time I was so enchanted by just wanting to know what was going on. It was so expertly just kind of like drawn out of me, just this elusive carrot hangling over me. Hangling? Dangling? Hanging? Whatever. They both have inherent questions to their existence that demand answers. You like, right from the jump, how did this zone society degrade from normal society? And how did this artificial society get built up, and why? While also being this very fertile ground for other inexplicable things. Like, you know, once you're dealing with these settings, there's still kind of mysteries on top of that aren't going to get answered just by understanding the existence of those settings, but need their own answers. Like, even starting from a completely coherent set of premises, there's still like a mysterious leap. The show is just so packed full of mystery. For a while, I was maintaining this list of mysterious plot elements, because I was just so amazed by how many they're able to make me interested in simultaneously. So I think it was like 20 entries long, and even though some of them were getting checked off, it still net got longer each episode. Each mystery was compelling in and of itself as well. I didn't feel like I needed an answer necessarily. It felt like an answer could exist, and that like an explanation was kind of dangling there right beyond what I could see. But I didn't feel like, oh, unless they explain this, I'm going to be dissatisfied. Because it felt satisfying just to be so expertly teased with this. Like, just to be in this inexplicable scenario and just feel enthralled and content by not understanding what's going on. Moreover, it just felt like a place where a bunch of weird, unconnected stuff was happening. Like, the scope of the world was so well fleshed out and so well designed that you knew, like, there wasn't space to get into every single topic in depth. But instead you were just in a mysterious place, and that occasionally there would be things, I say occasionally, but like 3 or 4 times per episode, there would be things where you would just go, oh, huh. Alright. And it just had such a nice vibe that there could just be totally standalone weird things happening that you didn't expect to be part of one overall gigantic theory of everything. But then, even though you say all that, even though, oh, the mystery is satisfying in and of itself, oh, I just like the vibe of a lot of weird things happening, when stuff did start coming together, and stuff came together way more than I expected it to, in like very subtle, very satisfying ways, like just like my beloved Suika game, when you think all is lost, but just somehow little shifts in gravity, everything starts colliding and merging and popping. Whew! Oh boy, that was an amazing feeling. Oh my god, just so many little things I anticipated like 30 seconds ahead. And then I just had long enough to like form the idea in my head of like, oh my god, like these two things are connected. Or maybe somebody in club chat like suggests it, and I'm just like, oh my god, that's true, that's probably true. And then just like almost instantaneously later, just seeing just a little more confirmation to know that it's true. What an amazing feeling. What a well-written show. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I've talked before about the 4 quadrants of mystery, because I want to really get into why this mysterious feeling really works and why it's so satisfying. And I think I first talked about this with Girls Last Tour quite a while ago. And Shadow's House is another great example of this. But basically scenarios where your characters know some things you don't because they live in that world, but then you know some things that they don't because they've lost a lot of informational access that we have today. And this breaks things down into 4 quadrants. There's stuff that our characters don't know and that we also don't know. There's mysteries that they encounter and could treat as mysteries and that we also are just baffled by. Then there's stuff that our characters know but that we don't know. So that's like a lot of stuff to do with the specific society that they're living in. They have a whole history. They recognize things, they know the reputation of places, they've been living like this for years. We haven't. We're just jumping in. So often they display like an expertise or make reference to things that we don't know, and we just are left in the dark. But then there's stuff that we know but our characters don't know. You know, they encounter some sort of object. What is this? What could this have been used for? You know, what is outside the outside? And we know the answers to those questions because we live in normal society, of which this is kind of like a distorted subset. And then in the end, there's stuff that we've all figured out, which is the opposite quadrant here, where the characters have understood it, we've come to understand it. Good. So I've talked about a lot about this before, and how compelling this is to have a setting like this, and how you can really nicely execute things because each encounter isn't so monotonous. It's going to get slotted into one of these 4 zones, and each of them kind of has their own appeal, has their own emotions associated with it. So I wanted to get even further into what those emotions are, because I think the show is just like one of the best executions of that I've ever seen. So stuff that our characters know but we don't know. There's like an unsettling, nonchalant feeling from the characters that I find really spooky. Like something that appears very weird and alien to us, seeing our characters that we kind of relate to in other scenarios, dealing with it like really naturally and with almost like a disinterest, can be like really, really unsettling and I think alienating for the viewers in a cool way. Also, it allows for info to emerge very naturally and holistically, like nothing is being explained to the characters and thus explained to you directly. But instead, you have to kind of do this like fact-finding on your own, because you're going to be interested in stuff that the characters aren't interested in. So you're just kind of like catching glimpses of stuff that they're kind of nonchalantly walking past, you know? Then there's the stuff that we know but our characters don't know. This can be dreadful, dreadful dramatic irony, especially in a series like this, which is overall pretty unpleasant. Just kind of coming to conclusions before our characters, or recognizing the immediate danger of something that they don't. They just don't know. They don't know, and you want to like scream through the screen. You're just waiting for that dreadful moment when they realize. And this can both be things that are just shown to us because we are in like the omniscient viewer perspective, and we end up with like a lot of information that our characters don't have. Or, and I think this is something that like really excels in these sorts of settings, it's like they don't recognize what it is, but we do. You know, like it's clear to us that this is poison. Because it's labeled like arsenic or whatever, but they don't know what arsenic is. This isn't an example from the show, by the way. That's not like spoilers, but it's that kind of feeling, you know, just innocently looking at this bottle of arsenic and being like, is this seasoning? And you're like, no! Then the stuff that neither of us know, this is like real mystery hours. And this is where we get a lot of character alignment, that we watch their investigations with them, and there's moments of desynchronousness because little aspects, there might be a gulf in knowledge, but generally speaking, this is when we're most aligned with the characters, most invested into their capabilities, because we both want to get to the answer. And then stuff we've all figured out, there's a brief catharsis there. It's like, oh, that's how those things connect. That's what that was for. You feel good for your characters, too, because they've taken a big step forward. But then, with a series like this, it's like, in these moments, you actually do then confirm the ramifications of what you've learned, and the danger that introduces, or the despair, the hopelessness. And you're like, oh, okay then. And that's not good either. So it's just kind of like 4 quadrants of suffering. But I think it's just such a powerful emotion, like navigating these things and things sliding from category to category. But, oh, I didn't finish filling this out. There should be some extra words, but whatever. You get the gist. What we're dealing with in this series isn't actually 4 quadrants, but actually 8 octrants. Because there's 2 settings. And there's stuff that the school characters know that the zone characters don't know, and stuff that the zone characters know that the school characters don't know. And the inside and outside have totally different knowledge sets, and then we have our own third knowledge set. And so it's like it becomes way more complex, and the interplay between those things, where we see something happen in the school setting and understand the ramifications it has for the outside setting, but then in the outside setting they encounter this and they don't know what it means. It's like yet another layer, because like maybe we don't really understand what it means actually, but we know that the school kids do know what it means. It creates an even greater sense, like. And then, we can actually go further than this. We can make a whole truth table here of the four kind of categories of character. There's the school kids, but then there's also the school administrators, which have, a totally different set of information than the school kids. It's not just the superset. They know a lot of stuff that the school kids don't. But the school kids have their own society and their own adventures and things that they're keeping hidden from the adults, such that it becomes actually pretty disconnected. And then the outside characters have their own set of knowledge, and then we, the viewers, have our own set of knowledge. And you can permute this completely, and it comes out to 16 different zones, 16ths, which is not, a surprising conclusion. That's obviously derived from just... like 4 choose 2 or whatever, but I really wanted to explicitly make this table and like go through the motions of making it, because I wanted to think, can I think of like a plot element that fits into every one of these rows? Can I think of a plot element that satisfies each of these unique conditions? And I could. And I kind of wish I wrote them down, but that would have been a lot of spoilers too, and it would have taken a long time to get through. But I really did. I was like able to come up with those intersections. And then what I also realized is that each one of these also has kind of a unique emotional tenor to them. That because it kind of like isolates different groups of characters, or it isolates us, it either puts us in like solidarity or alienation with different groups of characters, such that each time a different one of these rows is triggered, it's like a slightly different emotional response, and it like has different feelings of either like dread or dramatic irony or whatever. And that I just think is like so impressive. Like, I think that's what makes this series so emotionally rich in so many different directions. A whole lot of other stuff too, but yeah. So I think this is like a very illuminating exercise for me to work through. So I mentioned before, the outside setting has tremendous zone appeal, and what do I mean by that? So probably the best example, and what really got me into this mindset of a zone, is in the latter 2/3 of Gravity's Rainbow, which is one of my all-time favorite books. There's a section called The Zone, which is the longest section of the book. And it's just about the period in Germany right after World War II ends. And things are just like very chaotic, very messy. There's like a lot of American soldiers that are now off duty, but they haven't returned home. And there's a lot of like German eccentrics kind of coming out of the woodwork. And a lot of other armies are there as well. There's just this like really weird diversity of stuff happening. And a lot of like kind of normal societal infrastructure has crumbled. But all of these very resourceful people are kind of reigniting different movements and different services, and it's fascinating. So yeah, other famous examples in Stalker, they refer to this as the Zone. It's the area that contains all sorts of weird mysteries and stuff that were... In the movie, it's not explicit, but in the book Roadside Picnic, it's the idea that aliens had briefly visited there, and in their wake, they had left all of this just completely unfathomable refuse and stuff. So it just creates this zone, and then this kind of system around the zone of stalkers that know how to navigate the zone, and then people that are interested in seeing different parts of the zone or getting different things from the zone, and just like all the things downstream from that. There's a really great book called The Temporary Autonomous Zone, by a guy who, I always have to give this disclaimer, is a bit of a creep and will give some weird examples of what he considers to be the pinnacles of liberty, but we don't need to get into all of that. Basically, though, the book is about times through history in which something called a temporary autonomous zone, a little zone that exists kind of outside of typical laws and typical society, and is just, it's not going to last forever. It's not going to become a new country. They don't need to build a totally robust, indefinite society within them. But it's just something that just kind of goes on for a little while as this like weird, isolated, new society. And this actually happened in real life kind of recently with the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle, where during major protests they were able to barricade all of the cops out and take over a bunch of buildings and just kind of run their own society for a couple weeks, which was a really, really fascinating case to me. I had friends in Seattle that actually went to visit it a few times, which I'm really envious of. Anyways, these are all zones. These are all zones that have the explicit label zone. And then there's a lot of other places, like the setting of this series, that you could also definitely qualify as a zone in this sense. Let's talk about some common features of it. I kind of already implied some, but it's not necessarily post-apocalyptic. Doesn't need to be some cataclysmic event that led to the creation of the zone. In this series, it seems like there has been. But regardless, most kind of technologies and social constructs are gone. Maybe there's like internet, but you're not going to expect to get like Amazon packages or Uber Eats or something. Most of the societal constructs, like there's not going to be a nationally accredited school system. There's not going to be, these gigantic workforces and salarymen and stuff. Like, just the normal flow of society is severely disrupted in this area. In their place, all sorts of ad hoc systems have scrambled into existence. And this is something that I find very charming and almost cozy about zones. That I think is very well represented in this series too. Just like, suddenly there's no system in place to creating like a restaurant or creating some sort of delivery service or whatever. Instead, it's just kind of individuals' initiatives or very small community projects that spring up all over the place, trying to meet the needs of people within the zone that can't be met normally. Everything is like very hyper local, and I think the series handles this excellently. When they go from town to town, there's like a real sense of reputation within that town. There's local legends. There's a sense of what's going on in other areas, but it's like very vague and distant. Just a real sense of like tight interconnectedness. There's no kind of like individualistic alienation. Instead of, just grind setting throughout your life, everything is just inexorably linked. But those pockets of communities within the zone are actually very disconnected with other pockets because of the lack of these kind of like societal conventions and infrastructure. I think that's just like a very compelling storytelling area. It's not actually that different than the One Piece Island storytelling model, but that's a whole other topic. Traveling is difficult. You can't trivially get from just one end of the zone to the other. You can't just be like, I'm going to go to the east end of the zone. It's happening. It always involves like going to each locale in the way. It's like the very old school Lord of the Rings method of traveling. Resources are scarce, but they still exist. A key part of the zone is that it's not like The Road, Cormac McCarthy's The Road. It's not, an area where everybody is just starving and it's like Mad Max. Everybody's just willing to kill each other at the drop of the hat. You can kind of reasonably expect to like stay alive and have a life and, have some good times and stuff. It's not just going to be desolation all the time. It's not a comfortable lifestyle. It's not a luxurious lifestyle. Resources aren't abundant. There are things that are like rare and very sought after, but they exist. The law is unofficial. There's no central authority. There's no gigantic overriding monopoly of violence and punishment. But cultural codes are followed. This isn't Mad Max. People aren't willing to murder each other at the drop of a hat. There's definitely danger. There's like bandits. There's people that operate unscrupulously and try to take advantage of one another. But these things are still considered bad. Like, these things are still make you, outside of a society that does exist and exists among people that, mutually understand and have consideration and compassion. Any aspect of life we know it could still exist or could have been recreated, but it would be novel. And this is, I think, what really gets into what's so inspiring and exciting about the zone. Okay? So let's say you're a lawyer, okay? And you have this very societally defined execution-based job where, you're very constricted as to what your role in society is in a lot of ways, okay? Then zone event happens. Now you're living in the zone. You could still be a zone lawyer. That aspect of society could still have purpose. It could still exist and have been recreated. But it would be novel. It would be that now you are like a locally known paladin that is summoned to adjudicate cases where, the normal conventions of society can't come to a definite conclusion. You could be working at McDonald's. Boom, you get zoned. You can still try to make hamburgers, but now it's going to be this like real crazy thing where you hear a legend of some cow that still exists out there, and that's good for enough ground beef to get like 80 burgers, and you're journeying to try to bring this cow back, and you're like, maybe if there's a second cow and it's a male cow, we could actually get infinite cows, and all I want to do is like recreate the taste of this burger. And it's like, that doesn't have to be happening. There's no sufficient supply and demand such that this would just spring into existence due to kind of the abundance of society as we know it. But instead, it's like this novel, compelling thing, this narrative that could emerge. And it's like any aspect of society could reemerge through these means, but it doesn't have to either. And it's like, I don't know, this is like the adventurousness of the zone to me. Like, this is why it's so compelling as a setting. There's space for any new thing to suddenly crop up too. There's no systemic roadblocks around it. There's services that we can't currently imagine that may have no use whatsoever in our society, that in the zone society can become like a cornerstone of a community or whatever. And this can have all sorts of things to do with like the specific settings of that zone. In this one, there's all sorts of monsters and stuff about. And so people that are equipped to actually fight the monsters start to become, a very valued and a cherished service. Like, or imagine a zone that takes place in a place of like a ton of radiation in the aftermath of like a nuclear explosion or a nuclear plant failure. Nuclear explosion doesn't have that much lingering radiation, whatever. So like a doctor that's equipped to deal with radiation sickness suddenly becomes like this whole, I don't want to say profession, but because that's like old society, but it's like a, what's the word I'm trying to think of here? That means like your life's work or whatever. I don't know. It's so good. Once it's this frightening, uncertain place, but it's also freedom. It's freedom from just the bad parts of society, from the mundanity, from capitalism, from the reduction of everything into metrics, from the overwhelming tyranny of money, from everything that drains the fun and novelty and excitement out of things that actually are pretty damn interesting. Cooking a burger is cool. Mediating social disputes is cool. What's not cool is being forced to grind out hamburgers at McDonald's from frozen patties that you're totally alienated from. What's not cool is defending horrible laws that are completely unjust and perpetuating systemic violence. It's like everything old and tired and broken can become new again within the zone. Alright, I've talked about this for a long time. This one is also... Oh, I just repeated the slide twice. Oops. This video is it's sloppy compared to some of the other ones. But whatever. So yeah, I'm a big fan of zones in general. The setting is very, very compelling to me. I hope you understand that by now. We talked about it for a long time. But the way this zone interfaces with the school zone, which I wouldn't really call a zone in terms of the zone appeal, but whatever. And our expectations for what these two settings will look like, that's what really sucked me in. I was wondering how the school setting, how that system was going to relate to the zones, what sort of effects would ripple back and forth between these two settings. It made the intricacies of the school stuff take on this different edge. There's always this direction in which to speculate. How did it connect to the outside of the outside, which is how the kids refer to this idea that there might be something beyond the school. Like every kind of situation that emerges, every rule that you learn, every little bit of lore, you're always kind of like trying to make that connection stronger between the two settings. Stuff that normally doesn't have like very much appeal to me. Like when I first started watching this, I was a little disappointed that there's like the man-eaters, the Hiroko, that present this like overwhelming monstrous danger in the outside. Our heroes have to like fight them. There's action scenes. And honestly, I was like, it's unnecessary. I don't need monster fight scenes. But when I realized, and pretty early on I realized this, and I don't want to spoil what it is specifically, that there's a very direct connection between stuff that we see in the school setting and the nature of these Hiroko, then I was so compelled. Then I was so interested to see each and every one of these monsters to try to make that connection stronger. Even the series, it's like so edgy. I probably should have mentioned this sooner as like a disclaimer. I think it's really worth trying to watch even if you aren't normally a fan of edginess. But it's pretty damn edgy. Like really brutally sad stuff happens. Really uncomfortable, violent things. Like really unique and compelling versions of those things, but unpleasant nonetheless. And stuff that I would normally say is like excessive, like shock factor, exploitive, whatever, here becomes really compelling and moving, because you want to not just know how it ends for the characters. You're not just caught up in like the how it affects our characters and stuff, but you also really want to know how does this inform us about the setting. All right, we'll wrap things up with some general praise and try to sneak in under the hour mark. I just can't get over how emotionally balanced this series is. Like, I just talked for a bit about how edgy it is, but it's so much more than that. There's, like, really brutally unpleasant things. Things that you would think would sour the entire mood. Like, I'll give a little content warning. There is, like, rape in this series. And you would think, yeah, that would kind of take the fun out of it. But somehow, it's also just full of, like, mystery and intrigue and specula, like, trying to figure out what's going on. This challenge of investigation that's so, like, intellectual, that just kind of feels like putting together this very intricate jigsaw puzzle and trying to recognize what each piece could be a part of. And you think, oh, maybe that would, like, distract from the deeper feelings, because now you're having this sort of, like, intellectual engagement instead of just an emotional engagement. But it's more than that. I cried at parts. I felt like rage. I felt catharsis. I felt triumph. I felt betrayed. I felt dreadful. I felt paranoid and afraid. But I also felt joyful. I laughed. I felt cozy. I felt warm and connected. The range. Everything. I felt every emotion I could have. And moreover, with these twin settings and bouncing back and forth between them for different sequences and different acts of the show, I've often felt two entirely different sets of feelings in parallel. And it wasn't, like, disorienting. It wasn't, like, a painful juxtaposition. But instead just kind of, like, the thrill of enjoying these two different aspects of the show for totally different reasons within, like, the same episode. And oh man, the production. Even if it didn't have anything else, I would probably still praise this production for quite a while and give it a high score. Like, the action scenes, the battles against monsters, so flashy, so exciting, so innovative, and just kind of very, like, specific, deliberate decisions about how, like, strength and speed are conveyed. And then also these, like, really brutal, down-to-earth battles of person versus person with just, like, this really violent, intense choreography. Lots of creepy shit. Lots of scary shit. Really hostile, sterile settings. And also hostile, grimy, all-too-lived-in settings. Such rich, moving character acting. Heart-wrenching character acting. Make it stop. When the characters are suffering, it becomes so painful. So viscerally painful. But so many goofy shots, too. Every character just has moments of just total nonsense and joy and silly off-model shit. Just the real joys of anime. This is what I'm really here for at the end of the day. This is why this medium appeals to me so much. This is the unique X factor of anime is just this goofy expressiveness. Yeah, it's great. It's so great. I loved this series so much. I'm giving this a 10. I'm so happy to do so. I don't know if I want to wait for more of the anime because the anime was so well done, or if I should just start reading the manga because I really just want to know what happens. And I think being current with the manga and like speculating on where it's gonna go and stuff would be so much fun. I don't know. It's really great. So yeah, overall, this wasn't even from this season, so maybe kind of a weak season, but next season is ramping up to be pretty strong. I'm hoping to watch like a lot of shows if I get the time, knock on wood. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I love anime. I love talking about anime. I hope you guys have a fun time listening to me talk about anime, because I want to just keep doing this 4 times a year, baby. See you in probably late December. Bye-bye.